let's get this training started. I'll just quickly share with y'all. We have 2 trainings planned. This is the ideation training. Our speaker is Summer Reeves. She is an innovation director of Accenture in Houston, which is a really big company. I'm going to let Summer tell us a little bit more about what she does. But this is also being live streamed on YouTube, and it will also be recorded and made available for anyone to watch and to go back to. Okay. So with that said, so my name is Ravi Brahmbhatt. I'm the director for Student Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I should probably just wave in the camera just so that I was here. Okay. But we are putting on the competition. We do this every semester. This time we've got a new name, Shark Tank. We've got new sponsors, and we're hosting 2 competitions. One just for HCC students, which is this group here, and we're also partnering with University of St. Thomas and Houston Baptist University to offer the Bold Ideas Pitch Competition, which is you could double dip on both of these competitions and launch your projects. So with that, Summer, I want to kick it off to you.
Awesome.
And get us ideating and get us the training that we need so we can come up with ideas to change the world.
Perfect. Sounds great. So thank you guys for coming. Again, my name is Summer Reeves. As Ravi mentioned, I am the Innovation Center Director for Accenture's Houston Downtown Innovation Hub. So a little bit about Accenture we were talking about earlier. So Accenture is one of the largest consulting firms in the world. So we have about 500,000 employees worldwide. And we work mostly with the S&P 500, so the largest companies in the world. Right? And we work with them on basically everything. Anything you can think about within business, we have people that are subject matter experts in that area and can help and go and support those clients, help them think about things in a different way, help them actually execute and process things if they need just more hands on deck to do things, help them with strategy, direction, etc. All over the place. So me specifically, as part of my role at our Innovation Hub, I work specifically with our clients to bring them in and teach them about what is the latest and greatest in technology. Where is the future of their industry going? Right? What do they need to be thinking about? And we also work with them leveraging design thinking techniques in order to help them identify where are their pain points and challenges, how might they solve them, and what might that look like? Okay? So how many of you guys have ever heard of design thinking before? Anybody? Awesome. I'm going to teach everybody something they don't know. That's fantastic. I love it. All right. So a couple things. Number one, as we get into this, as Ravi mentioned, this is focused around getting you guys prepared for the Bold Ideas pitch competition, right? So the first question is, well, okay, how do you actually come up with the next big idea, right? Do you have to just be kind of like walking down the street and all of a sudden this amazing idea pops in your head? Well, I'm going to actually walk through a process where you guys can actually figure out ways to help with that process of actually coming up with the ideas and think about whether or not they're good ideas, right? And if they're actually going to land, right? So what does a good idea look like? A couple things. So this is something that we use in design a lot to think about what is kind of that innovation or that big idea area that you need to be striving for. And there's 3 components of that. One is human desirability. Do people actually want it? Because if you come up with an idea and nobody cares about it, that's not useful, right? You're not going to really sell anything or do anything with that. The second is it needs to be business viable, right? So if you come up with something but it costs millions of dollars and people are only willing to pay $25, that's not going to work, right? There's no business case for doing that. And it has to be technologically feasible, right? You have to actually be capable of building it, right? So I can say that I want to build flying cars, right? Is it technologically feasible? Maybe, maybe not. We might get there eventually, but is it today? Maybe not, right? So you have to really think about those 3 facets of the idea. And as you're coming up with ideas, you want to actually test yourself and test your ideas against these things and really think that through. The challenge that a lot of people have when they come up with an idea is they fall in love with it, right? And they fall in love with it and they're not willing to test it, they're not willing to throw it away, they're not willing to change it, and they're not willing to listen to feedback. And so as we go throughout this process that I'll be talking to you about today, that's going to help you with how do you make sure that you are able to get feedback, test yourself, and really think about these things in the right way. Okay? Any questions so far? Any questions about this? All right. Okay, so now Ravi, keep me honest. These are the focus areas, correct, for the competition? Is that right? Yes. Okay. So as you guys are thinking about this, these are the areas of the competition that you're going to need to identify an area you want to basically work within. So that's helpful, right? So that gives you a little bit of constraint to start thinking about where you want to focus your attention. So education skills, so thinking about sustainable workforce for tomorrow. Does anybody know any ideas on what the challenges are within this category? Why this is an issue? Any thoughts? So let's think about what does the future of our workforce look like, right? So if we look 50 years in the future, what are some of the problems with our workforce? Well, robotics is becoming more and more feasible, right? And more business viable, right? And so what's going to start happening is you're going to start seeing a lot of jobs being automated. So a lot of lower skill jobs that can be automated are going to come out. So what that's going to do to the workforce is it's going to cause them to have to shift into different directions. A lot of people, there's a lot of concern around, are we going to end up with a lot of unemployment because all these jobs just disappear? Well, that's one school of thought. Another school of thought is, well, it's not so much that jobs are going to disappear, it's that jobs are going to change, right? You need people who build those robots and people who program those robots and people who come up with ideas on how to design robots, right? And so it's not so much the jobs are going away, but maybe they're shifting, right? Which means that we need to start thinking about how do we actually create opportunities in education and reskilling opportunities for people that are in the workplace today that are going to need a job tomorrow. Does that make sense? So that's just an example of an area there. Alleviating poverty. What are some thoughts there? Do we have poverty here in Houston? Yeah, a lot, right? Right? What are some of the things that we see? We see a lot of homeless people, right? So you go to downtown, especially over the east side, a lot of homeless population, right? What are some other concerns? Safe and robbery. Well, so that's poverty tends to be a kind of like root cause to those things, right? So if you can help eliminate poverty, that starts helping reduce crime and reducing those type of issues and safety issues, because a lot of people turn to crime when they are put in a bad situation where they feel like that's their only option, right? So that's kind of an option there. Other things to consider is there are maybe people that aren't homeless, but they are struggling to put food on the table for their children, right? They're working 3 jobs and they don't have enough money to actually be sustainable, right? So there's a lot of things around here as far as improving income inequality, right? And cost of living and homelessness. So there's a lot of things that fall under that category and a lot of challenges that we see. What about economic advancement? Any thoughts on what that means? What are the challenges and opportunities there?
Really just getting like the general public in touch with where things are at and where things are going, and how to help them shape their decision around, like skills they should acquire over the next year, 2 years, 4 years, and maybe help prevent themselves from having their job disappear.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea or a great example because where I actually come from a very small town, and when I was in high school, the only jobs I even knew existed were like 5 things. You could be a teacher, you could be a police officer, you could be, you could work at the chemical plant, right? So there's like very few options. But to your point, a lot of people, as they are graduating and going into college, and even college students, may not know what all different jobs are out there and where is the market going, right, to make sure they're making those good decisions. Some other things to think about there is when we talk about economic advancement is, do you have a great idea that will actually create jobs? Maybe you're actually creating a product or creating a company, right, that could actually create jobs. Entrepreneurship, right, that's a huge thing as far as job creation, economic development within the Houston area, and then financial literacy. That one I really like as well. I'm a huge proponent of especially in early education and high schools and things like that, there isn't really financial, finance is not really taught very well. And so a lot of times you have challenges with people as they go into college, as they go into the workforce, as they kind of get out on their own, not really knowing how to make money, not knowing how to save money, not knowing how to make sure that they're prepared for the future, and being financially cognizant. You know what I mean there? And so there's a lot of challenges there on just how do we make sure that we educate people so that they can set themselves up for success in the long term. Okay? What about community well-being? What does that mean to you guys? Say that one more time.
I think about like improvement in the nutrition, like
Yeah.
for the prisoners.
No, absolutely. The two things that are my kind of soapbox topics for high schools are financial and then nutrition. Both of those things are not taught very well and have major impacts on people as an adult. So 100%, I love that health nutrition angle of making sure that we're teaching that early on so that people can make better decisions as they get older. Any other thoughts there? How safe is it to ride a bike in Houston?
It's increasing.
It's getting better, but it's not maybe where we would want it to be, right? So there might be opportunities or ideas that you have on how do we make pedestrian and bikes more safe to travel around the city? How do we provide better access to parks and things in local communities, especially for people who may not have access to vehicles? Or fresh fruit, right? There's a big movement going on in some other cities around doing actual like gardens, like urban gardening and things like that, and you actually do collectives and things like that. I think there might be some popping up around Houston, but that's also a really good way of really, as a community, coming together and how do we provide fresh produce, fruit, vegetables to the local community. Right? So lots of opportunities there. And then what about technology? Any thoughts there? New apps that solve specific challenges or fill gaps and needs, right? Also thinking about what are some new and emerging technologies that are kind of coming out to the market and just coming up with ideas on how we might be able to leverage that to solve problems in new ways, right? So a lot of times I'll talk with clients as an example, and they'll say, oh, well, we tried that technology 5 years ago. Well, technology is advancing so rapidly that just because we tried it out a couple years ago and it wasn't feasible at that time or viable at that time doesn't mean it's not today. So sometimes taking a look at a technology to say, is it ready yet? Can I use it? Or can I combine this with other technologies in really interesting ways? So when we talk about innovation versus versus invention, right? For example, invention is creating something net new, right? Innovation is using something that exists in a new way, right? And so when we talk about innovation, a lot of times it's really thinking about how do we leverage technology and ideas and different ways of working to solve problems in new ways, or combining things together to solve things in new ways, all right? So as you guys are thinking today about what you guys want to do for this Bold Ideas Pitch Competition, what you want to be thinking about is what areas here are you actually passionate about and maybe have some ideas and thoughts around. And as you're doing this, we're going to talk a little bit more about how do you expand those ideas within that area, because you as an individual may have only limited experience in a specific area, but how do you expand that experience and knowledge, right? So we do that through something that I'm going to talk to you about today called design thinking, right? So this is an example of a framework that you can use for basically innovation in design. So when you talk about design thinking, there's a couple different components to it. One is empathizing, right? So we want to make sure that we understand the people that are actually impacted, right? Then we want to think about, so then you're coming down and you're going to define. So once we've empathized with people and once we have a better understanding of their problems, their pain points, the opportunities, what are the moments that matter to them, right? Then we want to start defining that, right? Start documenting it, start understanding what are the insights that we saw, what do we think are some things that we should take into consideration, what are those problems and pain points, which problem do we want to solve? Because a lot of times if you talk to someone, there's lots of different pain points and areas, so what do you want to actually focus on, right? So then we're going into ideation. So now that we have that problem statement, that challenge statement, right, that we want to go after, how might we solve this in order to do this, right? Once we've defined that, now we want to go into some brainstorming or ideation, okay? Because we've actually done some research, we understand what the problem is, we've thought about, is that the root cause problem, right? So we know we're solving the right problem here. Then with the brainstorming ideation, we can not only with ourselves, but get a group of people together, right? So let's get a whole bunch of people together and come up with a brainstorming session. Because the more people you have in the room, right, the more, that too. The more the merrier and the more ideas, right? The bigger the ideas, right? Because if you get, and also what I would say is when you're thinking about doing things like that, try to find people that are different than you. Different cultures, different mindsets, different experience, right? Because if you just grab a group of your friends and you're all the same major, right? You go to the same places, you like the same things, you're going to get the same ideas, right? But if you get a group of people together that have different mindsets and different world experiences and study different things, you're going to get different ideas. And what you can do is you can start building on those ideas together to make something bigger and better than you ever could have done on your own, right? So next we want to prototype it, okay? If I sit here and explain something to you verbally, right, what's going to happen? You're going to have an image in your mind of what I'm saying. I'm going to have an image in my mind of what I'm saying, and they probably don't match, right? Now, when we prototype something, we're creating a visual representation of what we mean. Okay? And that allows us to have a more constructive and productive conversation with people to get better feedback and test that with people, which takes us into here, right? So we want to build that prototype so that we can test it with people, get feedback. How might this fail? Why won't this work? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it, right? We want to get that feedback, and we want to make sure we're going in with the mindset of, I want to change this. Right? I want it to get better. Because if you go in with my idea is a perfect little baby, and no one can say anything bad about my baby, right? You're never going to be open to evolving that idea to something that's going to be that's going to be better and more successful. Okay? And as you can see, this is kind of like a little 8 that goes back and forth here, right? Because it's a process that's iterative. It's going back and forth, right? You get the feedback, you go back, you think about it, you define what you heard from that, you go back and you come up with some brainstorming again, and you go through the process again, right? So it's not a one and done. Preferably, you're kind of doing some cycles on it. Any questions about this? All right. So you should have seen this as we kind of talked about that, but I always talk about there's different, if you go and look up design thinking, there's lots of different frameworks on how people look at design thinking, right? Everybody has their own flavor of it. But if you look at all of them, they all essentially have these key principles. If you're doing these key principles, you're essentially doing design thinking, right? First off, it's human-centered, right? We talked about that with empathize, right? We want to make sure that we understand who's impacted by this. What do they feel? What do they think? What are their pain points? What are the opportunities? Collaborative, bringing those different groups of people together, right? It's creative but structured. I always like to say this, and this one's an important one to me because design thinking is a creative process. It comes from the way designers think and actually attack problems. That's where this was developed out of. But in order to do this well, it has to be very structured. And you have to have a reasoning for why you do everything, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, okay? Prototype driven, we just talked about that. And then iterative, right? As we test that with people, we're iterating on it, we're improving, we're changing. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about actually using a design thinking framework, all right? So when we talk about empathize, these are some different examples of how you can do that, right? So typically when we want to empathize with someone, we're going to go out and do some research, right? And there's different types of research that you can kind of go after. So up here at the top, we talk about ethnographic research, which is really just the study of human behavior in their kind of natural habitat or environment. So it's really being able to go in and do things like interviews, observation. How do they actually, just observing them, how do they move? How do they work? How do they operate, right? There's contextual inquiry. I actually use this one a lot. It's my favorite, personally, method, where you're doing a little bit of a mix of observation and interviews. So I sit down and I'm watching how someone works, and then they do something I don't understand, and I'm like, question. Why? How? What are you doing? Right? Explain this. You know, so I can kind of watch how they're working, but I'm interjecting here and there to better understand and kind of drill in when needed. So I use that a lot. And then there's immersion, where you're in their shoes and actually do what they would typically do. Right? So if you were going and trying to understand the grocery shopping process and how we might improve that, right? Well, you might actually go grocery shopping and really think about, how is this process? What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? So that's where you're doing immersion. The next one is participatory design or research. So this is where people are actually involved, right? And people are participating into that. So you can do things like workshops, design thinking workshops, where you actually craft activities in order to get lots of people thinking about this and sharing information about themselves, and maybe doing activities where they talk about what do they like, what do they not like, how do they do things. And then there's also things like journaling. So maybe you actually are working with someone, you can't really watch them, so maybe it's something that's like you want to be able to, 24 hours a day, what is the process from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed? That may not be something, maybe a little creepy if you just kind of follow them around, right, for 24 hours. So maybe you ask them to do a journal and write throughout the day kind of what they do, how they do it, why they do it, what were their thoughts during those times. Then we have evaluative research. So this is where we're doing an evaluation of something. So this is used a lot of times in things like maybe app or software improvements, right? Or as we are developing something for like user testing. So think aloud testing, that could be something where you sit down with somebody and you actually hand them a mobile app that you've developed. And you say, I want you to walk through this, and as you're walking through, I just want you to say every single thing that comes to mind. I'm clicking this button. I don't like the color green. Why is it in the top left? I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. Oh, I figured it out. So that would be an example of someone actually doing think aloud. It's like literally just verbalizing every, not even every thought, it's like every reason, movement, thought, so that you can really understand the internals of what's going on. Okay? Heuristic reviews. So if you go and check out Nielsen Norman, so that is a big UX kind of website, and they've books and all sorts of different things. But they have some really great stuff on heuristics, which really goes through and talks about user experience and what are all the different elements of user experience design. What does good look like? And so you can kind of actually do like a heuristics review and like rate things. So sometimes like, how do you rate design? It's very subjective, right? It's like, I don't like the color pink, so I don't like it, right? So it's bad design. Not necessarily bad design just because you don't like the color pink, right? So how do you rate in a quantitative way design? Heuristics is what we a lot of times use, okay? Critiques, so sitting down and being able to just have someone critique your work. What do you like? What do you not like? system usability ratings, another kind of like scale rating system for maybe like a system or something like that. So the point of this is really just to show there's so many different techniques, right? And so as you're thinking about how are you going to empathize with the users that you're trying to solve a problem for, right? How do you do it? What's going to be most effective? So you want to think through, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to get out of them? What are the pros and cons of each of these things? Do a little research on these. Because each one of these things do have pros and cons, right? And they are best suited for different situations, depending on what you were doing, why you were doing, who you were doing with, right? And so that's a good thing to kind of consider. Now, for today, I want to actually give you guys an opportunity to see this in action, right? So we're actually going to have everybody in the room here pair up, and we're going to do a short interview activity, okay? So if you can move up here for me, because I need you two to be partners. Thank you much. All right, so if you guys will all grab a piece of white paper and a pen here, each person. So we have regular white paper right here for you guys to use. There you go. So grab one of the clean sheets there. So each person will need one. All right. Okay. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be doing an example of interviewing. All right. So I want each of you guys to determine who is going to be partner A and who's going to be partner B. It's not a hard decision. Just choose. It's fine. Not a trick question. All right. And so for interviewing here, the purpose of this is really to understand an individual's viewpoint, right? And just kind of dig in on something. We use interviewing. Interviewing and surveying tend to be some of the top ways that people do research. One thing to take into consideration is surveys are not the best. It's always, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to get information from 1,000 people, survey's the way to go. And you probably want to mix in some individual interviews, right? Interviews are better than survey because you can watch people's facial expressions. You can dig in. You're like, oh, you made a face. Can you explain that further? Why do you really feel that way? Tell me more, right? So you can dig in a little bit more than just direct questions. Observation is better than interviews because people lie, okay? And they don't do it on purpose necessarily, right? A really good example that I absolutely love, and it's such a good example of it, is there was a market research study that was done. And they brought a focus group in, and they sat everybody around, and they said, okay, we are designing these new boombox speakers, and we want to do some different colors. What color would you buy? And you go around the room, and every single person is like, yellow, right? We all like yellow. And then at the end of the session, they had the boom boxes lined up on the table, all the different colors, and they said, feel free to take one on your way out. What do you think they did? They didn't pick yellow. They all grabbed black and walked out the door. People lie, right? So they don't mean to. They think that they want yellow. But when it comes to actually doing something, they do something different. Okay? And so that's why contextual inquiry, observation, those things are so incredibly valuable, right? And a lot of times as you're thinking about research, you might do different techniques, right? And mix them up and do different things. But always understand that the closer you can get to actually seeing people in their natural habitat, the better results you're going to get. And the better you're going to see actually what happens versus what someone tells you is happening. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, did we all figure out A and B? I love this. It's just a social experiment on how long it takes everybody to figure out who wants to be A and who wants to be B. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give each person, I know, I just wanted to see what they would do. All right, so I want everyone, so partner A, raise your hand. Whoever raised their hand first gets to be A. You're A. Okay, awesome. Okay, so partner A, you are going to be the interviewer, Okay? So going back a little bit, I want you to, in interviewing, now typically you would have some time to think of questions and things like that. That's going to be a little bit off the cuff, right? Okay? But what I want you to do is I want you to focus the conversation on asking them, your starter question is, what are you most passionate about here? You're asking the person this. And then I want you to dig into why. Does that make sense? Pretty simple, right? So, what are you most passionate about? Why? And then as part of the interview process, you're trying to get as detailed of answers as possible. And what you want to do is you want to ask them questions where they tell stories, right? You don't want yes or no questions. Do we like poverty? No. Okay, moving on. That's not helpful, okay? Have you ever been impacted by poverty? Right? Things like that. Can you tell me more about that? Do you mind sharing that? Okay? So we want to prompt them with questions that they're going to really dig into details. And as they're going through that, if you have a question or want to dig deeper on something, ask them a clarifying question on it, right? Dig in that. So the goal of this, what we want to do, is to better understand, like, what area would they be interested in seeing a solution out of? Why? What's the pain point? What's the problem? Where is a challenge or issue within these areas that you could solve? Any questions? All right. Yes, question. So what I would like you to do is ask the questions, have the conversation, but as they are giving you information, make yourself some notes because you're not going to remember everything. You don't have to write everything word for word, but you're like, oh, that was a good nugget. Oh, I hear a pain point there, right? And they may say things, and you may pull an insight from that. They may not have said that exactly, but you're like, oh, what I understand is this, right? And you can even clarify that. It's like, well, it sounds like, based off what you've said, is maybe you have a concern around this, or maybe this is an area that needs to be solved. And maybe they're like, yes, or maybe they're like, no, what I meant was this. Clarifying is always good. Reflecting back and mirroring back what you've heard is always a really good technique. Okay? All right, so I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to do that, and then we will flip, and you'll do the same thing with the other partner. Okay? All right, I'm giving you about 4 minutes.
Brandon, by the way. Yes. Natalie? Okay. What are your passions? Education? Education skills? So you're educating people to have better skills? Cosmetic surgery. Failure? No, what's that? It's all fillers. The fillers. Oh, failing. Okay. Oh, okay. So you're trying to. No. And how do you expect them to better their skills?
Consider as you're interviewing is try to direct people towards just talking about the process, their feelings, their pain points. Don't try to steer slightly away from solutioning too much. Some of that might come up naturally, but the purpose of this is not ideation. The purpose of this is understanding. Okay?
So you want to focus on surgery, cosmetic surgery, where the students have better skills to do good jobs so they don't mess up people's faces. Marie had one question. What is this activity called?
Surgery stuff or anything?
I do not know a specific person, but I read newspaper and then I watch TV shows about cosmetic surgery.
And what made you come to the realization that these surgeons needs more skills?
Well, when I read about the traffic, they have like that like some temporary operation, but some they have permanent impact. They could affect more complicated. So doctor like skills is what I need.
Okay. Okay. Is it because you are concerned about how people might be feeling nowadays that they change their whole life by taking a decision that was affected for
Yeah, like it's very bad. I'm a girl, and I know like if you are studying professional and national cost,
Thank you.
it's so bad. I don't understand.
I've updated the slide. It should come up in both.
The person who have something in the face, I understand the situation.
what do you think about that many beautiful faces are symmetric, but many of people are considered beautiful are still asymmetric.
Uh,
Asymmetric?
Asymmetry.
Asymmetry?
Okay, asymmetry.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Oh, it's so bad.
So bad?
Yeah, I think if I were them, I will wear a face mask still. I don't give a fuck.
Really?
Yeah, but I still love them. And cosmetic surgery is just a very last solution.
The last solution. So you're saying that you want to teach people how to better
No,
their
no,
skills.
I'm not talking about teaching people. I just think about making a reference model.
Prototype model before they do surgery.
Yes.
And how are they gonna do that?
Well, that model will stimulate your face, your body, like the parts that you want to change. And then the practice of that model before you're ready to implement.
Oh, okay, so they can see the model.
All right, so start wrapping up current conversation. All right, and then we're going to switch. Same thing. So, partner B is going to interview partner A. Same thing. What are you passionate about? And dig into the why. All right, 5 minutes.
So what other you have passion?
I have a different set of passions, but when it comes to an idea or an innovation, then I'm very passionate about it and students and academic
And comedy?
in general life.
Oh. And yep, switch. Well, I don't know because those areas are not spiritual.
Spiritual?
Yeah, kind of abstract. Okay, what do you feel about those areas?
Well, I'm thinking that
Oh, wait. Are you thinking about a lot?
um, sort of, but not from a spiritual standpoint. I'm thinking about a way to actually contain life somewhere. So, in some sense, creating a better
Oh, it's good. Education.
enterprise side, like get better of the social side itself, kind of like that thing that I don't know, I want to be like this when I was a kid, something like that, or Jumanji or something. That gave me a lot of thoughts that like, okay, it's gonna happen. So I think it comes from that, and then like knowing that many family members died as a child, or like your many family members have been very sad.
Oh, so is that other family members dead or like
Mm, that and friends, people close to me.
okay. In the book, we have oh, but is it only economy so what? Do everyone
Technology.
technology? What kind of technology?
I don't know how to tell you.
Okay. I thought that everyone can help people prepare the memory after the death. All right.
Good? Okay. All right. So, any thoughts? What did you guys learn about each other?
We're both powered by passion, or empowering people to be compassionate.
Okay.
How being compassionate will empower an individual and the community.
Awesome. I love that. Any other thoughts?
Things in common, or what was the question?
Just what did you learn?
Well, I think she's very concerned about the self-esteem of the people and the capabilities of certain professionals that can enhance that self-esteem.
Okay. So like mentorship type of thing?
Sort of, but more intended towards um, cosmetic surgery.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. What else?
About the community well-being.
Community well-being. Awesome. What did you guys think about the activity?
It was a great way to get to meet each other on like a heart-to-heart approach.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that we were like we visually meant to speak about something, but it was something that was very emotionally oriented.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Awesome. Any other thoughts? Have you done interviewing before? No? So, first time. So new thing. What did you think about it?
Well, my partner said that he wants to think about any technology that help um, um, family member to remember about him, any memory about him after he's passed away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like that. It's a very neat idea. Awesome. So a couple things to keep in mind. So we're doing this as a quick activity just to show you some examples of different techniques, right? Typically, if you're going to do interviewing, you're going to be a little bit more structured, right? You're going to actually spend some time thinking about some of the questions. What are you trying to achieve or get out of the interview with someone so that you can go in with some initial questions. Now, those questions may change based off your conversation, or you may want to dig in, but having some idea of what are you trying to get out of at the end of the interview and what are some initial questions you can start with to start that probing process is always a good idea. Okay? Typically, question, go ahead.
Oh, I think interview should be applied for some depend on professional and experience level. Like you cannot interview someone have knows professional in cosmetic surgery. You have to ask somebody like you're a student, you're a doctor, they have some stuff to do with that. They have the insight. They have perspective to tell you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, is not only thinking about what questions you're asking, but who do you need to interview, right? So making sure that you're finding the right people. And once you identify kind of like what problem area, what focus area you're looking at, is what are the different people that are impacted by this in different ways, right? So to your point, if you're talking about like cosmetic surgery, you want to probably talk to a doctor that works in that field. You want to maybe talk to someone who's been impacted by, maybe they had a horrible incident happen to them and they need to do like facial reconstruction. Like, what was that process? How did they feel about it? Maybe someone who just has a self-esteem concern, right? And they want to actually look at cosmetic surgery for that. Talking to people who have had good experiences and bad experiences with it, right? Because you want to get both perspectives so you can really understand the entire landscape. So making sure that you're really thinking about that, and there are different activities, kind of things you can do to really kind of, you can do something called like stakeholder mapping, where you actually think about like who are all the people impacted, and you're actually like sketching it out and drawing it and think kind of like a mind map thing, right? Who is all connected, how does it all go out, and then you gotta kind of ring fence that a bit to say, who am I gonna actually focus on, because it can get big, but make sure you really think about that, all right? Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is synthesizing, okay, or defining, right? So as part of that define phase or step, a lot of times we're synthesizing information to really better understand kind of like what's going on. So I talked about stakeholder mapping, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys some time. So I've got some workshops here that are just an example of some different kind of questions and things you can kind of ask yourself. It's got the little boxes on it. I've got one. There we go. Okay. I have it in here. Nope. So I've got some different things on this, and we're going to use this in just a second. But some of the things that are on here are, you've got some little boxes here that you'll have some time to kind of think about and kind of fill out in just a minute. So we talked about stakeholder mapping, so actually thinking about that. Personas, user segmentation, mind maps. These are all different variations of a similar thing, which is essentially, how do I create a picture of the type of people that are impacted by this, right? So.
Is that the same thing with that one that I talked to you, that you have to choose people to interview?
Yes and no. So it's more that once you've done that, it's saying, okay, let's say I interviewed like 20 different people. If I were to take all those people and can kind of combine them into a couple types of people, what would that look like, right? So it's more creating generalized archetypes of people, okay? So for example, personas, if you create a persona, you might create something, let's see if I have an example. This one's okay. If you Google persona, you'll see all sorts of different examples, but basically a persona is like, what does your user look like? So this is an example of a marketing persona. So I always talk about fit for purpose. What's your objective, right? So the first thing you'd have to think about is, what are the things I care about, right? What are the pain points? What do people like? What do they not like, right? Maybe if you, depending on what your problem is, it might be like, where do they like to go? What kind of apps do they use on their phone, right? What's their age group, right? Male or female, right? It's about identifying what is the target market, essentially. And if you're doing something like a mobile app, that starts becoming, a marketing persona starts becoming very important, right? Because if you have an app, you got to market that app, right? If you're doing something where you are trying to solve poverty, you still want to have something that understands people, but you're maybe not trying to sell them something, right? So you need to understand them, but it may look different than this, right? It's about how do we take all the information about people and put it in a way that as you're having communications or as you're talking to people, as you're designing, as you're bringing people in and getting feedback, how do you communicate your user group, right? So this is also an example here, right? So it's like, okay, here's some like different segmentation, right? So it's like in this case, they're looking at, okay, business analyst versus app developer versus data scientist versus data engineer, right? And it talks a little bit about them. It's got some different components and keywords and information and statistics, right?
It's not like a part of
Kind of, but the key thing to note with this is when you talk about personas, it's not about an actual person. You're not trying to take a single person and put them on a page. You're trying to take the 10 people that all kind of had the same general thoughts and feelings and ways they do things and putting into one. And you create a fake name on that. And you say Joe, right? Joe likes to go to the park. He has a dog, right? He really wants more parks. And he wants dog parks in those parks, right? Because he loves his dog Skippy, right? That would be a persona. You didn't necessarily interview someone who's exactly that, but maybe you're combining a couple people, right, within that. This is something I actually really, really like, and this is something that our company is starting to use more of, is actually looking more at mindsets. So mindsets are actually taking into account the fact that we are not always the same person at all times. And we don't always react to things in the same way in every situation, right? So for example, let's say that I am a businesswoman, right? Let me see, what example do I have here? So in this example is a financial example where they were actually looking at banking in like the new century, right? So if you look at a lot of like younger professionals and people and college students and everything coming in, they interviewed a lot of people, and basically the general consensus was, I don't need a bank in the future. How often do you guys go into a bank and talk to a banker? I mean, very rarely, right? We mostly operate online nowadays, right? Right? So what this study was doing was going through and trying to better understand what is it they want out of a bank in the future, right? Which is different than what people wanted at a bank 20 years ago, right? And so what this did is it thought about basically those wide scope, narrow scope, high structure, low structure. And essentially, basically that wide scope is like people who like to think about the big picture, right? Narrow scope is like, okay, I'm thinking about the present moment, like really detail oriented, right? High structure, I follow the rules, versus low structure is like, I follow my instincts, kind of whimsy, right? And then they kind of created these different categories of achievers, balancers, explorers, experiencers, and they identified where their different people they interviewed kind of fell into based off the interview to kind of understand what their kind of market looked like. And then they created essentially kind of like persona type things or mindset segments out of those different things here, right? And so for instance, on the balancers, it said, in this mindset, people define success by getting the best deal in each transaction, maximizing rewards, and staying on their financial plan, right? Achievers in this mindset were people that define success by budgeting for clear, often tangible goals that helps them feel in control and prepared for the future. Right? So the balancers were risk averse. They liked order and consistency. They prioritized like tracking things. The achievers were optimistic. They liked budgeting, and they were really looking at the long term. Right? So if you think about that, you know, different people kind of have different focus areas in different things. Right? And so this is a way of kind of thinking about that. Talking about another reason to use mindset. So I was talking about, so let's say we're looking at, let's say a grocery store app, right? If you did a persona of like a 32-year-old professional woman, you might look at that and say, okay, she never wants to go shopping, she's super busy, she travels all the time, blah, 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 right? But maybe that's who she is at this point of her life, right? While she's at work, she's that. But maybe when she steps out of work, she actually enjoys shopping because it's a way to like take a breath, like get out of the house, right? So it's like we're not always the same thing. And the challenge with personas is sometimes it pigeonholes people. So if you think about all the different ways that people interact or address things, one person can fall into multiple things. But if you are considering your design for each of those areas, you're always hitting those different mindsets, no matter where you fall. Does that make sense? It's a little bit of a complex thing. the key thing with this is to not overcomplicate it, is really just saying, what do I need to capture? What did I learn from my interviews? And how do I document it in a way that helps me better understand that group of people? Right? Okay. The other things that we use a lot of times as part of this kind of define phase and synthesis phase is things called like journey maps or experience map or service blueprints. So these are a way of understanding a person's journey, right? So when you're doing an interview or if you were doing a workshop or something like that, you might do something to try to understand what are the steps that someone takes along their journey. What are the good parts of it? What are the bad parts of it? What do they like? What do they not like? What's really time consuming? What's not time consuming? Right? And then be able to kind of map that out. It doesn't have to be crazy visual like this. Be sketched out on a piece of paper. The key thing is, do you understand the process they take and their journey and how they feel about that journey? Okay? So let's take like a homeless person, right? If you were to go and interview several different homeless people, right, and try to understand what does their day in a life look like? So you wake up in the morning, right? What do you do? Where do you go? Why do you go there? What's good about your day? What's bad about your day? What do you like? What do you not like? What do you wish you had? Right? So as you start thinking about that, you can start kind of documenting that, and that helps you identify the problem areas and then how you might solve that. If this is their journey today, what could you do to change that journey and make their life better? So this is a tool to understand what's the current state of things in order to better understand how can you redesign that experience. The redesigning an experience, a process, creating an app, creating a physical object, changing a process, changing legislation, right? Like lots of different things can do that. Lots of different ways of solving something, right? But you first have to understand what is the current state. Stakeholder map? So stakeholder map is who, stakeholders are basically who is an influencer of what I'm doing, right? Or who is part of what I'm doing, right? So if I were to your question, to the comment you made earlier about like cosmetic stuff, right? A surgeon would be a stakeholder. A patient would be a stakeholder, right? So it's all the different people and a stakeholder map is what are all those different people and how do they intersect with one another? A patient contacts a doctor. A doctor works with their back office people. Their back office people work with Medicare, you know, et cetera, right? So it's how do you map how all these people interconnect? Okay. Here's another example of like a blueprinting type process or journey mapping type process. So you can see there's lots of different ways to do it. If you go on Google, you can find a million different examples. Again, back to what information do I have? What information do I want to communicate, right? And that's going to help tell you what information to put here. Okay? There is no magic bullet. There is no magic template that tells you how to do everything the exact same way every single time. Everything is contextual when you're doing things like this. And always, always, always you have to think about what am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to communicate? What information do I have? What information do I want to get? What do I need to get more information on a document? And that helps you build those things. Okay. The next thing that we want to talk about when we're synthesizing is what's the problem or challenge, right? So as we were talking through our interviews and talking with different people, okay, what problem did they have? What was that, and what was that root cause, right? So I have an issue with this. So then you need to think about, well, why is that an issue? Well, because of this. Well, why is that an issue? Because of this, right? Have y'all heard of 5 whys before? It's basically just 5-year-old you getting to relive your toddler years and just ask why, until you can't ask why anymore, right? It's digging down, right? That's root cause analysis. 5 whys, that's what that is, right? Okay? And then lastly, what's our vision, right? So we understand the users, who's impacted, why are they impacted. We understand what the problem is, why it's the problem, right? Now, what's our vision? What are we wanting to change? What do we want it to be? Does that make sense? So it's a process that we go through. Okay? If you just start off here, so if you just leave here today and say, I'm going to solve this, right? What's the possible issue there? What's the problem with jumping right to what solution you want to build? Maybe, maybe not. It could be I want to plant 100 trees. Yeah, that may not be expensive. But if you didn't do any of this other stuff, what's the problem with that? You could have issues later on. Could have issues later on.
Is the root cause really being addressed in like an efficient manner?
There you go. I would say not necessarily in an efficient manner, but are you solving the right problem? Okay? This happens all the time. Has anyone ever heard of an app? You're like, why did someone spend so much money doing that? That's completely, I would never use that. Have you ever used an app, software, done something you're like, this is stupid. I'm not going to use this. I refuse to use this. Yeah? Yeah? You guys aren't using technology enough if the answer is no there, right? Okay? Yeah. Have you ever used a mobile app and thought to yourself, there's no possible way that they actually tested this with the users that were actually going to be using it? Have you ever been frustrated using a mobile app? Yeah? Why?
I think it's stupid. Like, it doesn't solve it. Like, yeah, I use a math challenge. I use an app for solving math. But it's just, what I need is to find the derivative, but the level they did it is not reach that level. So
Right. So it doesn't actually solve the problem, right? That's what happens when you do this. Because somebody said, I have a great idea. I'm going to do this. And they didn't actually think about who's going to use it. Did they talk to those people? Did they test it? Did they actually think about what the actual root problem, what's the actual thing people are wanting? They just jump straight to solution. And when you jump straight to solution, you end up with solutions that don't work. And you end up with solutions that people don't like and refuse to use. Right? So we want to make sure that we're always doing our due diligence of really understanding who do you think would be using your solution, right? What problem are you solving? Do they think that's the problem, right? Is that actually the problem, or is that a symptom of the problem, right? Because we don't want to solve symptoms, right? Preferably. We preferably want to solve root causes if possible. Right? Or at least understand what the root cause is, even if you can't solve that and need to solve for a symptom. Okay? So by going through this and really understanding all that, you can make sure you avoid those type of situations. Okay? Another example? Journey map? All right. So now what I'm going to do is I want everybody to take a moment, right? And again, this is super high level. You'd usually want to spend a little bit more time. You'd want to interview more people. But I want to give you an opportunity to kind of think through some of these areas based off the interview that you had, right? And think through who's impacted, right? So based off what you guys talked about, who would be impacted by this situation, okay? What are the problems, challenges, pain points that you heard, okay? What problem do you want to focus on? You might have heard several problems. Okay, let's drill that down. What's one problem that we want to focus our attention to? Okay, what do we think the root cause of that is? Is that the root cause? Or do we dig down more? Okay, what's your vision of the future? And what value would that bring? So if you solve this, okay, if in the future you had this magical thing, right, that solved everything, what would be valuable about that being solved, that problem being solved? Okay, not necessarily the solution, right, but what would be valuable about solving this problem? Okay, what are the key behaviors related to your focus area? So are there key things that you heard, any key behaviors that people like, they tend to not like this, or people always like to do X, Y, and Z? You may or may not have some of this stuff, and that's fine if some of these are blank. It's just a way of kind of thinking through some of the stuff. And any key insights, like, oh, 20, people in college really want to have this, right? That's an insight, right? Based off all the interviews I did, all the many interviews you did today, right? And are there any like mindsets or areas that you want to take into consideration? All right. So again, just giving you a couple minutes. Feel free to fill in some of this stuff. Feel free to leave some stuff blank. We did a very rapid thing. You're not going to have all the answers here. But these are just some examples of things that you can be thinking through once you've done interviews and start synthesizing your information and trying to better understand what you heard, so that you can then be more prepared for going into brainstorming and coming up with solutions to the problem. Okay? So we're not trying to solve the problem right now. We're trying to understand the problem so that we can better solve it. Questions?
Our own, or what we heard?
What we heard.
trends come out. Like you interviewed 10 people and all of them said that this was a pain point, or all of them said that they do this. So insights are really just you filtering up key things that you think are important. And then for mindsets, this is an example of mindset. So kind of thinking about what are the different kind of areas where people, so you say, okay, the group of people impacted with this, what are the different mindsets they might have? So for here, they use examples like they have people that are like high achievers, they have people that are like explorers, they have people that are really focused on experience, right? If you said something, it might be like super busy professionals. It might be like people that are like interested in saving the planet. Like, what are the different kind of mindsets that people have? And for this, like for this example, you probably don't have enough information to really do that. But those are some things that you might want to consider as you're doing it, because different mindsets will approach things from different ways. One person is going to look at a solution and go, "Oh yes, this is perfect for me. I love it." Another person would be like, "Well, they didn't write out the instructions really, really detailed, so I hate it." Right? Or somebody else is looking and go, "There's no pictures. I hate it." Right? Because different people approach things in different ways. So thinking about what are the different, based off the people that are going to be using your solution, what are the different mindsets you see based off of user interviews and people that you're interacting with? How do you kind of categorize these people together so that you can make sure that when you're solving it, you're creating your solution, you're addressing all those different areas. Yeah, well, yes, the key thing is the reason why we've started shifting more towards mindsets is because, yes, people can be multiple things. And so as long as we're addressing the mindsets, I don't care if you are two of those mindsets. As long as I'm addressing those mindsets individually, I'm making you happy. Right? So if you're thinking big picture, so think about a big picture, you might, like when you go to your front page, you've got a holistic overview of your finances. Whereas a detail person might hit a button that says, show me the detail. Cool, I've addressed both of those concerns. All right, I'm gonna go and wrap up. All right.
So the next thing we want to talk about is, now that we have a little bit better understanding, we've kind of synthesized our data, now we want to start coming up with ideas on how do we solve it, right? So this is always the biggest issue for most people, because most people are trained to immediately try to solve a problem. Oh, you have an issue? Let me help you. Here's how you fix it. Here's how you change it. Just do this, right? Just quickly jump to the solution. And with this process, it's meant to keep you from jumping to solution. It's meant to say, hold, wait, right? Let's think about it for a second. Let's make sure we've done appropriate research. Let's make sure we've dug into it. Let's make sure we've thought about it, right, before we get to this point. Now, once we get to this point, there's some different things that you can do to really drive good results, all right? So one is explore possibilities and think big. So art of the possible research, okay? Let's say we are trying to solve homelessness. Have any other cities solved it? What did they do, right? Is there any new technologies that are being used that could help, right? Just go and look at random technologies, what's emerging, what's some interesting things happening, right? Just get your mind thinking about what's out there and what's possible, right? Because a lot of times there's a lot of things out there going on and happening that you're not aware of, right? So you want to understand what has been done, what's failed, what are some possibilities, okay? Doing some brainstorming activities, which we'll do here in just a moment. doing workshops where you can bring lots of people in so you can crowdsource, how do we solve this, right? Then evaluation. Once you've come up with ideas, okay, now how do you pick one? Let's say you come up with 10 ideas. How do you pick the right one to move forward with, right? So thinking about how do you evaluate these ideas in ways that matter. So for you guys, right, in the pitch competition, there's criteria, right? So I recommend as you brainstorm, start rating how you fit that criteria, right? How well will that idea fit that, right? Also think about how it might fail. This is something that people don't think about enough, right? How will this fail, right? Why will this not work? Think really hard about it. Get feedback from other people as well. So like I said, one of the biggest challenges I see with people trying to come up with really big ideas and do something is they fall in love with their idea and they're not willing to pivot. They're not willing to change. They're not willing to kill it. And sometimes you need to kill it. Okay? You're like, oh, this is the perfect idea. It's great. You look up, Houston tried this 6 months ago, and it failed because of X, Y, and Z. Yep, nope, this isn't going to work. Right? Okay? So, or you look at it and say, why did it fail? Can I change my idea to address those issues? Right? So you got to make sure you're looking at that. Be willing to evolve, be willing to change, be willing to fail it. Okay? Getting that user feedback to help with that. Refining and expanding. So once you've kind of tested it around, now let's start digging in. What's the detail behind it, right? So we can have an idea that's one sentence, but if you don't have any detail behind it on what does that mean? What does success look like? What are the key things that we would need to do to accomplish that? How long will this take? What kind of financial capital is required to do this, right? When you're working with a group of people, a lot of times we'll use different techniques in order to help people quickly come to consensus, right? So we'll do things like voting activities. We'll do pitching activities, right? To be able to identify pick, but if you're working with a group of people, this can be helpful, especially if you can't come to a consensus together. Okay, question? Round robin, yes. We will actually be doing that in just a moment, so I will show you then. This is an example of a round robin activity. So it's basically a way to refine your idea a bit more, have someone tell you why it will fail, and then come up with an updated solution that addresses those concerns. So it's a rapid prototyping and iteration process, essentially. Okay? All right, so that all being said, let's get started on some ideation. All right, so I want everybody to grab one of the blank pieces of paper. Make sure it's a new blank piece of paper. Already got it? Okay. And this is what we're going to do. First off, pick it up. All right. Fold it like a hot dog. You didn't follow directions. You failed. All right. Now, fold that in half. That's right. You never know what you're going to get when you're working with me. All over the place. All right. Then fold it again. All right. Now once you've done that, unfold it. And you have 8 grids. All right. So for this next activity, this is an activity called Crazy Eights. And the purpose of this activity is really just rapid ideation, rapid individual ideation or brainstorming, okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys 8 minutes, okay? You have basically 1 minute to come up with 8 different ideas, 1 minute per idea, 8 minutes to come up with 8 ideas on how to solve this problem. Questions? So the goal would be is that you're kind of like doing something we call kind of a double diamond. You're kind of going wide on like thinking big, like who's impacted by this? What am I looking at? What are the problems? We start refining down. Okay, who's impacted by this? What problem do I want to solve? So at this point, what we should have from that other activity is, what problem am I trying to solve? Right? This is an activity to say, how am I going to solve it? What ideas do I have to solve it? We want to come up with lots of ideas, right? If you've already come up with a solution, come up with more, right?
So, on project or idea, right?
Based off your conversation with your partner. You are solving their problems, not your problems. Okay? There are situations where you have something very niche to yourself, right, that you want to solve, but that can sometimes be a little dangerous because what happens? You fall in love with your solution, right? Because you're solving for you. Again, that's not always a problem, right? But you have to be cognizant of that. And then also keep in mind that a lot of times to solve big problems, a lot of times you're having to solve for other people, right? And so you really want to make sure that you understand who are you solving a problem for and how can you solve it in a way that will make impact and that will be good for them, okay? So again, these are all just examples to help give you guys tools as you think about your project, right? Because if you came in here today with how you want to solve your project, you missed the process, right? So what I want you guys to think about today is, how do you go back and maybe rethink about it a bit if you came in here with a solution, and make sure you're doing the whole process to ensure you're solving the right problem in the right way, okay? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, okay? All right, so I'm going to give you guys 8 minutes. So you're going to write or draw or whatever you want to do, kind of your ideas. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just start getting them down. Crazy ideas, practical ideas, all ideas. Just get them on there. Purpose of this, just quickly getting stuff out. And if you run out of space, if you get more than 8 ideas, flip it over to the back and do some more.
So if you have unlimited money, what's an idea? If you had zero money, what could you do? How would Apple solve it? If Apple had this problem, how would their company solve it?
Just the idea itself, or like the explanation?
Just ideas, fine for now.
Did anybody get 8 ideas? Yes. Got 8 ideas here? You got 8 ideas, right? Anybody get more than 8? No, we stopped at 8. Good job. Awesome. Cool. So again, this exercise is really just to help you kind of think of lots of different ideas really, really quickly. Okay, so we use this a lot of times in order to get people thinking big, thinking outside the box, kind of going wide. And then what we like to do is say, okay, what are your 2 favorite ideas? Go ahead and star those. All right, so the next exercise we're going to do is we're going to do something called round robin. So if everybody wants to grab one of these guys. And this is a way to start defining your idea in more detail, to get people to test that idea and give you feedback, and then basically to come up with a evolved idea. Oh, what else? Paper. Oh, all right. Okay, so go ahead and put your name up at the top left. Okay, and then want everyone to write their challenge statement. Now, their challenge statement or problem statement is basically what's the problem we're trying to solve. So we usually will frame this as how might we do this in order to accomplish this, right? How do we eliminate homelessness in order to improve people's lives or something like that, right? So what is the challenge and what's the value? So when you were looking at this exercise, we talked about what's the problem and we talked about what's the vision and the value, right? So that's kind of pulling those 2 things together to create your challenge statement. How might we solve this problem in order to accomplish this vision or success? That make sense? So I'm going to take a moment and go and write that. To next write your proposed solution. So this can be pretty quick, all right? So I'm going to give you guys about 2 minutes. So don't go crazy. We don't need a novel, but explain your solution to that thing, to your challenge, okay? So based off all your ideas, which idea do you want to kind of move forward with?
Just one?
Yep. You're detailing out one idea on how that idea could solve. So I want you to just do just that first section, all right? You can fold it if you want. But you're just filling out proposed solution only. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and at the end of that 2 minutes, you're going to actually pass it to the left, and then your partner next to you is going to read your solution and say, why will this fail? Okay? And then after that, it's going to pass to the left again, and someone's going to read your solution. They're going to read the critique, and then they're going to redesign your solution to solve the issues that were documented. Okay? So 2 minutes, real quick.
All right, one more minute. Yep. Correct. All right, start wrapping up
Your thoughts and pass to the left. I'll help you. Yours will go here. Pass left.
Right.
Right, my left, your right.
Just solution?
Yep.
Reading the solution?
Yep, so read the challenge statement, read the solution, and then write any ways you think it will fail. So just the fail, and then stop there. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes, read through, and capture your feedback on why you think this might fail.
What is that? I'm gonna write.
Yep, tell them why it's going to fail. Constructive criticism. Feedback is a good thing. In what ways could this fail?
Yep. You're done. You're good. All right, one more minute. All right, start wrapping up thoughts. And then go ahead and pass to your right.
My left? Whichever way.
Or.
Nope, keep passing.
Oh, okay.
You do not get to redesign your own solution. Someone else is going to redesign it. All right. All right, so go ahead and take a moment, read through the challenge statement, the initial solution, the reasons why the last person thought this might fail, and then I want you to rewrite the concept, rewrite the solution. Yep, on that last panel, you're going to iterate the solution, taking into account how can we change the solution to help minimize the possible risks of failure. Question? So, read through this, and then you're going to rewrite this in a way that will help to mitigate the issues that were identified. How could we change our solution? You're writing in that last panel.
Oh, fine.
So how would you redesign the initial solution based off the feedback that was given?
All right, one more minute. All right, want to start wrapping up? All right, as you start finishing up, go ahead and pass your paper back to the original owner. Feel free to take a look at what came out.
It's over here, right? So what kind of feedback did you get? Where did your solution come out? Any thoughts about the feedback or the iterated solution? What'd you get out of that? Any learnings from people taking a look at your idea?
I'm having trouble trying to comprehend the writing,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and I'm sure that whoever is reading mine is gonna have.
Understandable. Anyone else see anything?
What do you mean?
Like any interesting things come out of the feedback?
Well, oh, okay. I discovered that the guy who is it you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the same thought as me. That remembering memory just temporarily. It should be for the
Okay. Any other thoughts? What do you think is valuable about doing a process like this? This is a rapid one. It's more as an example than getting something really out of it, but how do you think a process like this would be helpful as you think about the pitch process and you coming up with a really good, well thought out idea?
Well, I love it because it's systematic.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us think out of the box, but yeah, it's have a system.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Yep, and so that was one of the principles I talked about earlier, right? So when we talk about design thinking, it is creative. We do want to think outside the box, but we want to do it in a systematic and structured way so that people understand the process and we can get structured and good feedback and make sure that we're getting to a specific goal or objective, which is getting a really well thought out, refined idea, right? So how do we get from point A of maybe not having an idea at all the way to point B of I've got this really great idea that I really think could work, right? Any other thoughts?
I think of like getting yourself outside of yourself
Mm-hmm.
and just be in someone else's eye, perception, perspective. So that gives you like a different view, a different angle.
Love that. That's exactly the point of doing a design thinking process is what is that human-centered approach is a lot of times we think very internally, right? How do I solve this problem that I care about? But is that a problem that a lot of people care about? Or do 5 people care about this, right? Is this a more holistic issue? And if I changed a couple things, I could reach more people and solve a bigger problem, right? What are other people facing that I don't face, right? Trying to better understand people. Cool. Any other thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. I found the design thinking. They share the common style with engineering thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
engineering. And like that process to make engineering do with their product. That they have principle, they have brainstorming, they have selection,
Mm-hmm.
solution, and they have manufacturing, and they have testing, and they have yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is not something revolutionary or new. This is an evolution that we initially, many, many years ago, people started talking about human-centered design, and then there was user-centered design, and then there was design thinking, and the latest thing, if you want to look it up, is life-centered design, right? So there's constant evolution, right? And we're constantly learning from things that other people come up with. So lean startup, right? Six Sigma, right? Manufacturing, engineering process, scientific method, right? All these things are how do we start bringing the best of these methods together in a way that allows us to be able to get better results, right?
Well, I just have an insight of this whole process. I mean, coming from marketing background, innovation, it's it's one part of this thing aside from the idea. But I think personally the most important part of this whole um, challenge is changing the people's mentality
Mm-hmm.
into that sense, I think it's more viable constructing an idea or innovation based on the vision of what is a need that will be adapted
Yeah.
and solved.
And I would challenge one thing you said just ever so slightly, and it's not about doing things in a way to change people necessarily, but how can we design something to meet them where they are? Right? So there is change management, there's change as part of that, right? Because we want people to adopt something, right? But what we want to do is create something that's so great that people want to use it, right? Right? So it's, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed. This solves this huge issue for me. Like, I never even knew I needed that in my life, right? Never knew I needed Uber in my life, right? Turns out I definitely need Uber in my life, right? Who knew, right? So it's about finding those opportunities, those pain points, those issues, those challenges, and solving it for someone. So it's not a kind of forcing people to change, which historically has been how people operate within like business and products and things like that, is how do I make them use my product? It's how do I make people love my product, right? How do I design it in a way that they love it? So a couple things to wrap up here. So we talk about prototyping, right? We're not going to do that today. We're short on time, but there's some different ways when we talk about visualizing our concept that you want to take into consideration, right? So you can do things like storyboarding, where you actually like draw out like a story and you tell a story about how someone's using your product, right? Or how someone's interacting with your solution, right? You can do different types of diagramming. If you're doing an app, you might do a user flow diagram. You might do an actual like concept poster. You can look all these names up and you'll see examples online on what these look like. I won't go through them exhaustively. You can create like InVision apps if you're doing an application, mobile app, software, things like that. If you're doing a service, if you're changing a service, you might do something called a future state service blueprint or a service map, right? So again, there's lots of different ways that you can visualize your concept, but the key thing is, what you're trying to achieve with this is, how do you visualize what you're wanting to do so that you can get feedback from people and you're talking the same language, right? So talking about feedback, we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? So there's different types of feedback that you can do, right? So we can do things like think aloud testing, which we talked about earlier. You can do critiques. So what you saw here was an example of someone critiquing your work, right? They told you how it might fail, right? Pitching. So maybe you bring this up and you get a panel of people together and you pitch your idea to them and they give you feedback on what they think about it, right? You might do focus groups. So you actually bring a group of people into a room, you sit down, and you share your solution with them, and you get feedback and have a discussion, right? So there's lots of ways to get feedback, but it is important to get feedback as part of this process. Very, very important. Okay? Here's some different resources. So if you want to learn more about this, you want to dig in more about this process and such, design thinking, this initially originated out of Stanford. So Stanford has a lot of information. They have their own particular framework or method to doing this. They've got a lot of free resources out there that you can go and grab. IDEO was actually developed from the professor at Stanford who came up with this process, and so he actually stood up IDEO, so they also have a lot of great stuff. Luma Institute is really great, so this is an example of a template that Luma created, and if you are a student, I believe you get a discount on Luma Workplace, which provides templates, videos on how to do things. They talk about how you put different activities together in order to get to certain accomplishments or certain goals and objectives. User experience type of things. If you're interested more about that human-centered design, that user-centered design approach, there's lots of great places you can go to learn more about that. There's also some great local groups if you want to dig in more on the community aspect of this, of like user experience and experience design and design thinking. Trends, some of the things I talked about today, Fjord Trends. Fjord is the design and innovation arm of Accenture. And then we also have Accenture Technology Vision. So if you want to learn more about new and emerging technologies and what's kind of out on the horizon, what we're seeing as trends in both design and technology, those are some great reports that you can read up on and give you some great inspiration on things you may not be aware of. And then lastly, we've got some really cool stuff around Houston. As you're doing a design challenge in Houston, it would be good to understand what Houston sees as its current issues. So it has actually a list of priority issues for the city of Houston, which is really interesting and might help drive some decision making there. And then there's also some great data about Houston at the Greater Houston Partnership, if you want to just get some data and statistics depending on what you're focused on. Okay? So we are like right at time. Any quick questions for me? Yes?
Can I get those slides?
Ravi has those, and I'm sure we'll be sending out or making available.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
So round of applause. That was awesome.